Hi everyone, it's Nicole here, and today we are going to talk a little bit about quilting. I have promised to share how to put together this feed sack bag by Joanna Figueroa of Fig Tree Quilts. Now, you will have to buy the pattern. I won't be giving any measurements in today's video. So run over, grab the PDF pattern at the link down in the description, and then meet me back here to put together the bag. Now, I have sped up the video today. Don't mind that fuzz. This is my bag. It was sitting on the ground. I am going to first do the handles. So I'm going to take you through how I put together the bag. It may not follow the instructions exactly, although it is very close. The first thing is you need to cut your handles. Each bag requires 2. I will be making the large size bag, which is approximately 17 by 16 inches. And once you have the appropriate length for the size bag you're making, you want to fold your fabric in half, and then you want to put some stabilizer inside. Now, I have to say, I don't think this is the stabilizer I used on the first bags I made, but it does work. I don't want really flimsy handles, and this does make them nice and secure. So what I'm doing is I'm kind of just pressing the iron-in stabilizer in place, and then I am going to flip it over and iron on the fabric side. This is a jelly roll friendly pattern, meaning I think the pattern even states you can make all 3 sizes of the feed sacks with 1 jelly roll. I like to pick and choose the fabrics I'm using, and I did pick a contrast color of fabric from my stash for the bottom of the bag and the handles. So I want to let you know that right off the bat. Now, the other thing, I did not cut my handles correctly on this. So your stabilizer should be the same size as your fabric. And when I was doing this, I just went ahead and ironed it, and I thought I'll just run it over to my I'll take my wool pressing mat away and I will cut this and trim it up. So when you see me fold it in half, it is going to be the right size. So it should be the exact size. Once you have it fused, you want to fold it in half, iron, and I am ironing this really, really well. I want my handles to stay put for when I do the quilting. So where I'm going to deviate from the instructions is that I am going to iron this. The instructions have you start with your handles, and then if you want to add the pocket, you would add the pocket or do the instructions for the pocket after you put together the front of your bag. I am not doing a pocket. I kind of like mine without. It's a little shallow pocket anyway. It makes good use of the leftover scraps, so definitely follow the instructions in the pattern if you want to do that. Once you fold it in half, then you're going to fold each side in again. You're encasing those raw edges for the handles. And again, don't take shortcuts for the ironing. It's so important, because it's going to make the quilting portion of this so much easier. So I'm going to go ahead and do that for both of the handles and set those aside. So here I just wanted to show you that this one was the right size. I must have just miscounted when I trimmed the first one. So again, just pressing this down, and then we're going to fold it in half, and then we're going to fold each of those halves to the inside, press it really well, and set it aside for a minute while we work on the construction of the outside of the bag. For the outside of the bag, you want to trim your jelly roll strips or 2.5-inch strips to the appropriate length. You do not have to use a jelly roll. If you have scraps of fabric, just follow the measurements within the pattern, and you can choose any fabrics that you want, just as long as you have the 2.5-inch strips. So each side of the bag is going to need 9 strips, and you don't want them to be in the exact same order on both halves. So I'm going to show you that here in just a minute, so that makes a little bit more sense. I already have all of my strips ready to go. This is some Minky Kim Bloomberry fabric. This is what I used for the original bag, and I had extra, so I'm still using fabrics from that collection. What I like to do, and I feel like it's very worthwhile is to lay the strips out. Lay them out, look at them, see if they are in an order that you like, and play with it now. Much better than having to rip everything apart. You'll notice for my bag that there's going to be the exact same strips on each side. You do not have to do that. You could totally mix and match and have, 18 different strips if you wanted to. Notice how I'm flipping. So that polka dot that's at the bottom is now going to be at the top on the other side of the bag. That means the polka dot will be close to the pink and the pink will be close to the polka dot. See how they match up? If I did it exactly the same, that would be, you would have 2 polka dots together in this case, or 2 of the pink floral. Okay, I'm over at my Juki and I am going to start sewing with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. I do have a 1/4 inch foot on my machine and I am just chain piecing these super quick like, running them through. And once I have them all together, I'm not even pinning at this point. It's pretty easy to hold them together. I am going to go ahead and then match them up. We're just building each side of the bag. Once we have each side of the bag sewn together and then pressed, I always press my seams to one direction. You could also press them open if you wanted to. It's completely up to you how you want to do this part of the construction of the bag. So each side will be sewn together exactly like this. I am not going to show sewing each one on camera just to save a little bit of time here. So pretty. Okay, now I have the bottom piece of the bag. The width is the appropriate amount, but the length is a little long, and I do that on purpose. I will tell you, I squared up my strips a bit as well on this side, or where I'm meeting it up with the bottom part of the bag. I also cut my strips slightly longer than what was suggested. This gives me the ability to have a little give in trimming them up and making sure that everything is nice and even. A lot of times, I at least find when I'm doing jelly roll construction that mine get a little bit off. So I like to kind of clean it all up, square it up with my ruler before I join it. Now I leave the bottom of the bag a little bit long as well, just in case it's not going to exactly match up with my strips, and then I just trim off any of that excess once my bag is completely constructed. Just make sure that the excess is all on the same side so everything is even. Then I'm going to press towards the bottom of the bag. The other thing I do different than the instructions is I like to use Soft and Stable as my stabilizer for the bag. And so to do this, I'm not going to use the craft fuse that I think is what is recommended in the pattern. You totally can. I'm going to spray baste my fabric panel. This is the outside bag panel to the Soft and Stable. And I am just using that basting spray that you can see there, and I'm smoothing it out and making sure it's as straight as possible. Just spraying it a little bit at a time, smoothing the fabric and straightening it out as best I can. I don't want to manipulate it a whole lot. I just want it to be nice and straight. Also, before I do this, I did clean up the other edge of my jelly roll strips so everything is super straight before I ever get started. Now, to quilt the bag, the instructions call for putting the handles together and quilting them, and I put them together, set them aside, and then I put the bag front together, and at this point, then I put my walking foot on my sewing machine and I do all of my quilting. It simply just eliminates having to put the walking foot on and then switch back to my 1/4 inch foot, put the walking foot on, yada yada. That's just how I do it to make it easy. Before I quilt, I'm not going to draw lines on all of the bag, but on the bottom of the bag, I am going to draw a 1/2 inch lines all the way across the bottom using this chalk marking tool. I love this. It's a Clover chalk tool and it will wipe right off. I use this all the time on dark fabric. If you have a friction pin and you can see the lines, you can definitely use that instead and just iron them away when you're done. but this chalk tool kind of wipes right off, and I find it works great. I tend to like the close quilting here on the bottom of the bag, and it's really going to mimic what we quilt on the handles. So you'll notice I'm just marking all the way across, and then we're going to go over to the sewing machine and we are going to quilt all of this. The quilting does take a minute. The quilting is my least favorite part. I've talked about that before. I generally don't love the quilting. It's not bad for this project. It really isn't. Just the prep work is so important to have a good outcome. Literally, spray basting is a game changer for me because the fabric's not going anywhere, and it really did come together so easily. And then pressing the handles makes quilting those very easy too. Okay, so now we're ready to go over to the sewing machine. We are going to quilt the handles first. I quilt the raw edges of my handles first. I do make my stitch length a little longer on the Juki. I think I make it about 3. That just makes the stitches, you know, bigger, and I love how it looks. So here I am. I have 2 bags to make, and we're just going to start sewing. Actually, I guess I started towards the seam, the pressed seam first. And I literally do one side, I do the other about 1/8 of an inch away, and then I'm eyeballing it. You could also use your chalk marking tool if you want to, and I'm going right down the center of my handle. And then I'm going to go in between the 2 quilt lines on the right and in between the 2 quilt lines on the left. Nothing fancy at all. I'm really just eyeballing it, and it works out fantastic. This gives your handles decorative. I mean, it's decorative, but it also gives them a ton of stability. Okay, next we're going to do the big panel. It's ginormous, so forgive me as I roll things up and I start quilting. So I do the bottom of the bag first. So we're going to I like to sew one direction and then the other. When I quilt myself, I find this does help with any pulling or tugging, although I don't find with my Juki I have any of that. But just in case. And you definitely want to be using a walking foot. If you're using your regular sewing machine foot for piecing, you are going to get that pulling and the tugging. The walking foot is definitely what you want to do. So again, we're just going to do the entire bottom of the bag. Then when we get to the sides, that is where we are going to go about 1/4 of an inch from each seam on each strip. And that gives the quilting to the sides of the bag. Now, my preference when doing this, obviously, if you're just making a bag just for yourself, you would probably just be making one. Both times I have made this bag, well, I've made it more than just both. I've actually made this bag about 4 or 5 times, and every time I've made multiples. So I like to really just mass produce. And I have gotten much more comfortable with this as time has gone on, with how I like to do it. Now, once it's completely quilted, now we are going to clean it all up. We're going to make sure we're going to trim away all of the soft and stable. So I'm using my ruler here, and we're just going to work to get rid of all of these edges. And I don't cut my soft and stable exactly the size of the bag. I should have mentioned that before I started the quilting. I keep mine bigger to allow for any imperfections in the piecing, and then I just trim it away when we're all finished. I find that works the best for me. Okay, it is time to cut out the decorative part up at the top of the bag. For this, you want to use the template included in the pattern, and I traced mine on to freezer paper as recommended in the pattern. Joanna Figueroa of Fig Tree Quilts talks about the freezer paper template a lot in a lot of her patterns, and it's fantastic because you can iron it to your fabric, but it's not going to leave residue, and it's not going to be super secure bond or anything like that, but it's going to be nice and strong enough that it'll stay put while you mark the lines and trim away. So there I just ironed it in place, and I'm going to fold mine in half and cut both layers at the same time. That is not what the pattern says. That is what Nichol says. So follow the pattern if if you want to do it that way. I'm just going to show it here as well. So again, ironing. This is me doing 2 bags at once. You want to line up the handle part, and you want to center it as much as possible. Yes, my template is slightly bigger. I don't know if that accounts for maybe in my quilting it shrank up a bit or whatever. I just want it to be as even as possible. Then I am taking a pen and I am marking right here on my bag. I'm going to put some pins in place to hold the fabric where it needs to be so it doesn't shift and move on me. I'm going to remove the template, and I'm going to take my scissors and cut this out. You can also leave the template in place if you want to, but generally I like to just move it out of the way. And I'm going to follow my little lines here to cut this out. And we're just going to trim this away. Now this is the part where you can take this little half circle, and if you want to, you can turn that into a pocket. So hold on to that if you are making the pocket. I am not sharing the pocket version. In fact, I've never made the pocket version because it would be a very tiny pocket and I just don't feel like I need it. Now, I do want to say something here that I forgot to do, and I'm going to show you it in a minute. But right now, if you're going to do a label or anything on your bag, do it now while it's flat. I forgot. So you're going to see me put the label on, but the bag is not flat, and it was definitely a pain. Next, you are going to cut your sides of your bag at an angle. And I was like, this is not working. What is going to work better? Let's mark this with a pen, and then let's use the ruler and the rotary cutter in a safer way. Yes. So follow the instructions for how far to measure in on each side of your bag. It tells you for what size you're making, how far to measure in for that. So you go up to the corner of the bag and then you go in a little bit at the bottom. Okay, now we are going to turn our bag right sides together and sew down each long side. Also, if you have any little strings left from the quilting, it would be a good idea to get rid of those, trim those away at this point. So now I am going to open it up, fold it together, and down each long side, we are going to sew with a 1/4 inch seam. The most important is to make sure the bottoms of your bag match up. Everywhere else, it doesn't matter that much, but make sure that that seam right here, you can see me matching it up, that matches, pin it in place so it doesn't shift and move, and then go sew down the sides of your bag. So here I am at the machine, and I will be honest, I just drew a little line. Because this has soft and stable, it's so thick, I did leave my walking foot on. Normally I would use my 1/4 inch foot, but I literally just marked it and then used my walking foot. It was easier. Now we want to make these little box corners so that the bag sits up. And again, the measurements for the size bag you're making are in the pattern. How far you measure in or measure down from the corner. So you put your hand in, you make a triangle in the corner, and then you want to fold it out as even as possible, and you want to measure down the length that it tells you in the pattern, and then make sure that the length across is the correct length. And then I draw a little line and I pin, because we're going to go sew those lines and then trim away the corner. And we're going to do this for both corners of the bag. So now you can see I'm just going to fluff it out as straight as possible. And I like to use my ruler, and I measure down and measure across and then mark it, pin it, and then we're going to go over to the sewing machine and sew that little line. And you want to reinforce this really well because this is the bottom construction of the bag. And I make sure and backstitch really good at the beginning and the end. And again, I just use my walking foot here. It went through the layers really nicely. Perfect. Oh, and then you get dizzy. So sorry. And here is where I realized I forgot to put my label on. So I took the table off of my machine so that I could easily manipulate this. This is a Minky Kim label. It does match the Bloomberry fabric pretty nicely, or any of her fabric lines, honestly. I love her little labels. And it just says handmade, and I am stitching this on in place right on the outside of the bag. Just going around again, I think my machine is still set at that 3.0 for that part. Okay, perfect. Now I'm just going to take my scissors and trim away the corners, about 1/4 inch away. Now when we flip our bag inside out and turn those corners out, you are going to have the nicest little bag. Look at this, you guys. How cute. Okay, home stretch. We need to get our lining and our handles. Now the handles, I have found that for the handles, I like to use these binder clips. You want the handle to stick out further than the top of the bag, and then you're going to sew over them and secure the handles. You're securing them to the front of the bag. So make sure your handles are going the right direction or the same direction when you attach them, and that they stick out approximately 1/4 inch past the top part of the bag. And it's very important to get these centered because you don't have a ton of seam allowance on either side when we attach the lining. And we will talk more about that when we do the lining piece. So after you have your front of your, or the outside of your bag constructed, you need a lining. The lining is going to be very similar to the outside of the bag. It's one long piece, no soft and stable or anything like that. It's just a piece of fabric. You will want to measure it to match the front of your bag, minus 1/2 inch in length. You want it to be the same distance wide. And then again, I'm marking it with that template, and we're going to trim away that excess fabric. The difference in the length, so how far it is from the top to the bottom, that is to account to make it fit down inside your bag a little bit better. It talks about that in the chart, but the lining of your bag is really going to be, you know, however big your bag ends up being, because depending on how much quilting you do, etc., it can definitely change. So you want to measure that, and you want your lining to be exact, and then go from there. Just follow the instructions. I promise it's super easy. Then you cut away the top, and just like the front of the bag for the lining, we want to sew these front sides together with one little difference. I do need to iron out this crease so that it sews together a little bit nicer. The difference being, we need to leave a hole for turning in the lining, because we are going to be having to turn this bag inside out. So down each long side of the bag, we will be stitching, but in one of them, we're going to leave a little hole, maybe about 3 to 4 inches, just enough to reach your hand inside and pull it out. It really just depends on how much room you need to get your bag out. I wouldn't go any smaller than that because it will be hard. You do need to trim down the sides of the bag first, just like the outside of the bag. So whatever that measurement is for the size bag you're making, make sure you do that here. And then I'm pinning the sides, and we're going to sew down each of these sides. Let's cut this one really quick. I'm going to mark it, and then we'll just trim. The lining is much easier because we're not dealing with that soft and stable. And again, I'm just going to pin. I generally leave a little, I denote where I need to leave an opening usually. I don't even think I did here. Normally I'll put a pin in a different direction so it reminds me not to completely sew down each side. So we're just sewing down one side, back stitching, and then on the other side we're going to sew part of the way, back stitch, move down, back stitch, and sew down to the bottom. So I've left an opening. And you'll see that here, right there. Now we do need to make those box corners again. So we want to fold the bag out, We want to smooth it, trim, draw that little line. And then we're going to sew each of those corners, trim off the excess, and we are so close to being able to put the entire bag together. And I'll tell you my favorite part when we put the bag together too. Okay, so again, I marked those. I like to pin. I don't want my fabric shifting after I've got it pulled out the way I want. And here I'm just going to sew down those corners, and then we'll trim away the excess. I have switched back to my regular sewing foot here instead of my walking foot for the rest of the creation of my bag. Okay, so I'm going to double check, see how this looks. That looks good. Okay, so it needs to be inside out, because what we're going to do is do right side to right side, and we want to put the front of our bag inside the lining of our bag. So kind of tuck it in, push your handles down inside, and starting up at the handles, we're going to start pinning. And when I say don't be chintzy with your pinning, don't be chintzy with your pinning. Pin, 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 because you don't want this to shift. This is worth the extra time it takes to pin this. You will not have to go back and fix a bunch of things. I don't think I had to go back and fix anything for either one of these bags, which was fantastic. I love to just be able to sew it together. So we're going to sew all along that top edge of the bag, making sure that we catch the handles down in the bag, making sure that we enclose the whole thing. Now you'll notice there's not a ton of seam allowance around the sides of those handles, so you don't want to catch the handles when you're sewing that. You also want to make sure that the sides of your bag match up. And I make sure that I nest those seams right there where they meet up. Tuck that other handle down and just work my way around the bag. We're just going to pin, pin, pin. Now, I don't like to sew over my pins, so I will take my little magnetic pin holder here over to my machine, and as I sew, I will remove the pin as I get to it, so that when we get to the end, there aren't any pins. And I will say I accidentally missed one, and when I turned my bag outside, one of the bags inside out, or right side out, I should say, I got myself and I had to go back in for a pin. Oh, it hurt. So make sure you're removing them. I missed one near the handle. Oh, sorry about the dizziness again. Okay, we are going to start sewing. I know it's hard to see. There, that's a little bit easier, and we are going to start sewing all the way around. Take your time. This is sped up. I will tell you that I take my time with this more than anything else. Just take your time sewing. Make sure that you sew nice and even. As I get to the handles, I'm making sure I'm not catching the handle as I come down the side, and then you're kind of having to manipulate a lot of layers here. I think this is the worst part. Not even the top stitching at the end do I think is that bad. This is the worst part to me, just because you want it to be nice. You want it to all go together beautifully. So just take your time with this. You can see I'm coming around. I wish it really went this fast. Do you think we can speed it up for real-time sewing? When I do speed up, that's when the mistakes happen. Okay, as I come around to the other side, we will backstitch where we started, and then we are going to turn our bag right side out. We're going to reach in through that hole of our bag and pull it out. Take your time. You don't want to rip anything. You don't want to rip your lining, because we're pulling it through that hole in the lining, and that hole can be a little, it's pretty small. We don't want to leave a super big one. But once you start working it out, it will come And I'm just going to keep manipulating, pushing it through. And my favorite part is the handles. And I'm going to show you here as I get this all pushed out. We're not going to worry about getting the handles pushed out great until we have the right side or outer part of the bag out. Gentle, gentle is the name of the game. Don't want to rip anything. Oh, there we go. It's released. Okay, so my favorite part is this. Gently tug the handle, pull up, and look at that. It's perfect. And pull up. I don't know why I find that so satisfying, but I really do. It's my favorite part of the construction of this bag, is how awesome the handles look when you pull that up and out. Okay, now we need to close the lining, the hole in the lining of the bag. So what we're going to do, oh, see, there's that pin. That's where I caught myself. So I got to go in for it. We got to go on an adventure. And I jabbed myself going in to get it too. Be glad that I cut out the ow I said when I got myself. Okay, so now we want to close that opening. And I just machine close my opening. So I will take my iron and I'm going to iron that out as nice as I can. And I'm going to pin it. I'll run it over to the sewing machine. I will machine stitch it shut. It's in the inside of the bag. No one is ever going to see it, so I don't worry about doing an invisible stitch, but if you like to do that, you totally can. I just machine stitched that little opening shut, and then this is also very important. It's not the most fun, but I suggest taking your time and ironing. Iron, iron, iron all the way around the outside of your bag. Pushing the lining inside. I am just taking my time here. You can see I'm rolling that lining fabric in, pushing it down, and I'm ironing. And the reason is we want to top stitch all around the upper part of the bag so that the lining stays down inside. So it looks really nice and clean and professionally finished. So I just really iron this well. It's worth the little bit of extra time it takes to push the lining down and iron it, because then you can take it over to your sewing machine and we are going to top stitch the whole thing. And I do extend my stitch length again to about 3 so that it looks the same as the rest of the quilting on the bag. And I can't express enough how important it is. Ironing is just so important. I say this as someone who, when I started quilting and sewing, thought that I could just get away with doing what I want. And I learned the hard way that is so not true. You cannot just do what you want. Okay, we're going to pick a spot. I usually start on the back so that I can meet here on the back. And we're going to just sew around. I sew it about, I would say about 1/8 of an inch away from the top of the bag. We're just top stitching. I did move my camera angle. I thought it might work a little bit better here. And of course, stitching over the handle there up at the top, that really just kind of triple secures that. And you want to go slow. We're going around a lot of curves. We're having to move this. Just take your time with this step as well. If you need to add some binder clips, sometimes if I notice my lining trying to start to roll, I will use binder clips to hold that down and then just move them as I make it to them and I move around. This is like the satisfying part of this bag, is pulling the handles out and the top stitching. I just love it. And that is it, friends. I hope this has helped you. I hope this has inspired you to make one of these feed sack bags. They are the perfect tote bag. I like to use mine when I am stitching. You can use it when you're going out shopping. It's just the perfect little tote to carry with you everywhere. Let me know if you have any questions down in the comments. And thank you guys so much for joining me for today's video. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time. Bye. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to my channel, click that like button, and don't forget to hit the notification bell to always be notified when I have a new floss tube, stitching, or quilting video. Thank you guys so much for joining me today, and we'll see you next time.